and welcome to Leaders in Conversation. I'm Anni Townend, podcast host and partner to executives, leaders and their teams, co-founder of Collaboration Equation and of the podcast Finding Your Collaborative Edge with Lucy Kidd, and of Walking Partnerships with Natalie Shering and Lucy Kidd. My guest today on Leaders in Conversation is Sally-Anne Airey, leadership coach, founder of Skilful Leaders, and author of Mindful Command, The Way of the Evolving Leader. She's also a podcast host of Fearless Forward. Leaders in Conversation is the podcast in which leaders weave together the threads of their life and leadership stories, the people, the places, and experiences that have shaped them, their values, their beliefs, their passion, and their purpose, to encourage and inspire you to be even more confident and courageous in your leadership. The title that Sally-Anne and I have chosen is In All the Noise, How Can We Be More Present for the People We Lead and Love? In our conversation, Sally-Anne offers insights into what truly good leadership looks, sounds, and feels like, and how becoming a better leader is less about what you do and more about how you are. And finally, why she created the concept of mindful command and what it is. Welcome, Sally-Anne.
Annie, thank you very much.
I'm very excited, having read and highly recommend to listeners your book, Mindful Command, which I think is, in the first instance, quite a challenging title. So I'm really excited to hear about the combination of mindful and command. Really sparked my curiosity and had me want to read the book. Plus the subtitle, The Evolving Nature of Leadership, that as people, as leaders, we are evolving all the time. So I'd love to hear more about how you've evolved and ask you, tell me about who you are and how you are in the world, the impact that you have.
Of course, it's a huge question, isn't it, for all of us? And I wonder, before I do that, just to pick up on this rather odd juxtaposition of mindful and command, deliberately so. I suppose slightly cheekily to show that we can put opposites together and they can make sense. Behind those words, there's a very concrete and pragmatic reason for that choice of title. But in terms of your question about me and my life and my leadership and what I hold to be important, I think what I've come to, Annie, is a realization that in the end, leadership is not some mysterious art or even skill. It really is about how we show up in the world. And the sense that it's not about the position, although it can be about the position. It's about what we bring. And that can be anyone, can't it? When I think of people that I've learned from or who have shown me something, they may not be in a leadership position at all. I might not even know them very well, but they've shown up and they've given me an opportunity to pause and reflect on what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. They've taught me something. They perhaps haven't even meant to, but it's been about how they are and how they're seeing things. And that's what I've learned from that. So I think, having pondered this question of what is leadership for a very, very long time, I've reached the conclusion that it is about how we show up. And if we can do that intentionally and clearly and with a broad sense of awareness and with compassion, and if we can be as grounded as we possibly can within ourselves, then generally speaking, we show up in the way we want to, in a sense of alignment with who we really are in all the noise, when we cut through it all, what's actually going on. I suppose this way of looking at it has evolved throughout my life. Did I always have this thought? No. In my 20s, is that how I saw the world? Absolutely not. I was too busy running around doing things. But I think over time that has evolved. And it's been a lot about learning from my mistakes, which have been numerous, hoping I learn anyway, and thinking about it, reflecting, deciding how I want to move forward. And I suppose different stages of life, this question evolves, doesn't it? So my values, I want to name just one, and that's love. When it comes down to it, if I'm not living a loving life, I suffer. And I don't always live a loving life. Sometimes I'm mean. I can certainly be unkind. But I suffer more because I'm not living my value of love. And I know that when I have a loving presence, when I'm listening, when I'm holding space, when I'm true to myself, I feel free. So I'm guided by that. Don't always manage it, but I'm guided by it and I come back to it. And my belief is that it's very important, I think, for all of us, particularly those of us who are in some kind of leadership role, whatever that may be, or as a parent, or as a partner, that we come to terms, we understand and come to terms with our gifts, whatever they may be. We may not recognize them, it may take us decades to recognize them, but we all have gifts. So how do we want to bring those special and extraordinary, individual, unique gifts into the world? So I believe that to be very important. And I think over my life, I've reached some kind of point, some kind of stage in my life where I'm able to do that with love on a good day. And it feels good.
It's lovely to listen to you talking about how you show up in the world with love, and for that to be very much in the foreground of your leadership. I'm fascinated in your use of the word love and the fact that you and I chose to have love in the title of this episode, and that when you're having a good day, that's how you show up. You've learnt a lot along the way, and what I really appreciate you acknowledging is that there are days when you haven't always, or moments when you don't always show up with love for yourself and for others. And that this is something that you've learnt. And from the very beginning of our conversation today, Sally-Anne, I thought you are somebody who is all about listening to understand and to learn. The two parts of really deep listening. You're listening to understand, but you are also listening to learn. And I know from reading your book that you have been an officer. What drew you into becoming in service? And you've mentioned in service of others. And what was your experience like serving as you have done? And what have you learned?
Well, Annie, you know what? When I joined the Royal Navy, almost straight from university, I don't think I was thinking of it as service at that point. I just wanted to have a nice job. I loved travel. I'd studied languages at university. I wanted to use them in a fun way. I didn't want to be a translator or an interpreter. I ended up being an interpreter, as it turns out, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to work with people. I wanted to enjoy myself. So the service part came later. I honestly knew very little about the Navy when I joined. I hadn't done that much research. I fell into it. I think I'd realised what I didn't want to do, which narrowed the field quite a bit. I love the sea. We'd always lived by the sea. I'd always sailed in, admittedly, dinghies as opposed to warships, but I'd been on the water. I'm a water person. It just made sense. But it was the idea of, I suppose, being part of something that mattered, perhaps, but I don't think I thought about it that hard at the time. I just did it. And that is actually something that can characterize my life, is that I'm very happy to get started on things before I'm totally ready. And I sometimes screw up massively, but most of the times it works out, right? So I think that was one of those times when I was young and it felt like a good idea at the time, and off we go. 23 years later, I'd risen to the rank of commander, and I was the Navy's first serving mother. The reason I was the Navy's first serving mother was that the Navy that I joined, unbelievable as this may sound, if you, as a woman obviously, got pregnant, the moment you could no longer fit into your uniform, you had to leave.
Wow.
Extraordinary, isn't it? It was in the 80s. And then 10 years later, in 1991, the political decision was taken for women to be combatant, to be on the front line, and everything changed. Opportunities widened, broadened, opened up. And along with that, it was decided that women who became mothers could continue serving. And I just happened to be the first one. Didn't plan it that way, but it's just how it went. And so that was interesting because it was, of course, breaking new ground. And I had to figure out how to make that work in an organization where, if necessary, you're working 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Doesn't happen that way, but the bottom line is that might be required of you. So in order to make it work, to be a reasonable mother, to look after my, turned out to be twin boys, I had to think what I needed to put in place to make all of that work. I also had to structure my life extremely carefully. And I had to say to my boss, look, this is going to work. These are the hours that I can be in the office. There was no working from home in those days, and certainly no hybrid. So to show up in the office every day, I had to have very clear hours. Because guess what? Otherwise, the full-time nanny that I'd employed, spending most of my salary on it, would leave us if she didn't have a life. So all of those things I had to think through. They were completely new to me. I was in my mid-30s at the time. But just to say that what I learned from that is if you're clear about what you need and you still do a good job, you make sure you get the work done. Obviously, I became extremely efficient. It can work in the right culture with the right leadership, by which I mean understanding, listening, compassionate, adaptable. And that's what I experienced. But I was the one at the center saying, this is what I need. This is how it needs to work.
There's a real sense in what you're saying of what you write about in your book of knowing what matters to you. Your boys matter to you. You love them. Your work matters to you. And being good at what you do matters to you. And so you found a way that gave you the confidence and the courage, I imagined.
Yes. And I think that's a beautiful summary, Annie, that when we pause and ask ourselves, hang on a minute, this is quite tricky, it's quite difficult. What matters most to me? What do I need to pay attention to? Because if I don't, it definitely won't work. So at least let's start with that and go from there.
It's a good question, isn't it, for all of us and for listeners to ask themselves in this moment. So what really matters to me? And therefore, what do I need to make happen? And what's the help, the support that I need to have in place to be able to live and lead what matters to me? When you think, and from your experience, about what is good leadership and what does it feel like? What does it look like?
When you're in the presence of a good leader, I use the word skillful. When you're in the presence of a skillful leader, how do you feel? How you feel when you're in the presence of a skillful leader is safe. We all want to feel safe, right? We want to know the person we're following, either by choice or otherwise, makes us feel safe. And when we feel safe, we do our best. We're creating the conditions to do our best work. There are others, but safety is important. Of course, psychological safety, as it's been termed. But it's more than that. It's trusting, isn't it, that the leader knows what they're doing, that they have some sense of direction. It may not be totally clear. Well, that's fair enough. We're in an uncertain world. Who knows what the future's going to bring? But at least has a sense of direction that they can explain, that you can buy into. They might even listen to the contribution you want to make to that, with any luck. But the point is you feel safe. So how do we as leaders show up in a way that enables the people around us to feel that? And it's much less about what we say, although that is important, and about what we do, although that matters. It's much more about how we are. I think our mistakes might be forgiven if we're skillful at showing up.
Absolutely. It's something which I think about a lot, not least because what matters to me is helping leaders and their teams create a safe environment in which people can thrive. It's at the core of my own work and my life and my leadership, and also at the core of my work with Lucy Kidd and our collaboration equation. It all starts with safety and trust.
I started a leadership program that I call Evolving Leadership back in 2019. And honestly, Annie, I started that in a super simple way. I live in the French Alps. the mountains and the energy of the mountains have deeply informed my work, in me and my work. And I just knew that if I could bring leaders out into the mountains, to be held in the energy of the mountains, to get away from their day-to-day, and frankly, in the early days, just to hang out together, that it would bring something nourishing. And the very first program I ran was pretty much that. It was over a course of 9 months where the group of 8 leaders came out to the mountains where I live 3 times, each time for 5 days. And there wasn't much in between. And what fascinates me when I look back, having written the book, having devised the framework, having done all of the things I've done since, that group of 8 leaders who came in that very first year got just as much, if not more, from the program than everyone has since with all of the work that I've done. However, as I ran that program in its first year, I did start to think, what would the framework be? But I drew it from my experience. So I keep coming back to, when you're in the presence of a skillful leader, what is happening? So what's happening, I think, is that leader has a broad and sensitive awareness, what I call balanced awareness. They're clear, they're grounded, present, compassionate in the sense of compassion being, we're all human beings struggling to find our way. So the humanity that needs to be present, I think, in a leader, understanding that all of us are struggling, even if we pretend we're not, and aligned with their values and beliefs. It's a big ask in this noisy world. And in another, it's so essential that it has to be the starting point, the examination of that, the willingness to examine who we are and how we align that with how we lead, to me, is a fundamental starting point, which doesn't have to be difficult. The most difficult thing is creating enough space to be okay with ourselves.
And the space to, and the time to, if you like, do the work. And your programs enable people to be in a totally different environment from their day-to-day, probably, in the mountains, and the place and nature supporting them in the hanging out together. I love that. It takes me back to what you were saying about you joined the Royal Navy for fun when you first started out. I imagine it wasn't always fun, Sally-Anne, far from it. However, that's where you set out with an intention to have fun. And your first group, the group of 8 leaders who came together in the Alps, came together and simply hung out together. And I think more than ever, that's so important that we create space and time to hang out together with an intention, which I think is aligned around leadership being so much more about who we're being and how we show up than what we do. Clearly, what we do matters, but something about being that skillful leader and bringing mindful command to our leadership, which is about the who we're being and the how we show up.
Yes, if we start with command, it actually derives from the military concept of mission command, which is all about being clear about what's needed in any objective and bringing people with you. So that's mission command. And so not very commanding in that sense, and certainly not directive, but is putting the mission, the task, if you like, at the forefront, but recognizing that it's the people that make it happen, both as a team and as individuals. And the mindful part, it does come from my mindfulness practice, which I, again, fell into as part of an exploration soon after I left the Navy, so 20 years ago, more than. And I realized how important it was to my life, how it had deeply and positively influenced me as a person, had really helped me to understand things and understand myself better. So I brought the two together. Command being the type of leadership I believe in, and mindfulness being a practice which I think is essential to a conscious life. So hence the term. And when I first put them together, I thought, no, it's perfect.
I love the challenge in the title, and it invited me to want to read your book, to learn more about mindful command, because command isn't a word that I use in my life and leadership. However, when you explain command as mission command, of being clear about what matters to you, of having a direction, and of people participating together in going on that journey and doing it with love, it all adds up for me.
And there is, I think, a degree of intention in how we show up. I think probably when, as a leader and a parent, as we step into any particular context, it's probably quite important to decide how we want to be. Not to control it, not to determine outcomes, not to force anything, but simply to say to oneself, how do I want to show up for this? One of my practices every morning is to say, how do I want to show up today? If I don't do that, I'm less intentional.
Absolutely. I think it's a great question to start the day with. And often it's a question that I will ask at the beginning of a team day, is to invite everybody and to go round the team and to ask everybody to take a moment to think about, how have I shown up today? How do I want to show up today? What's the impact I want to have on my colleagues, that felt impact? And then later on, I will talk about how important that is when we have the impact that we want to have on the people around us. It is aligned to what matters to us. I live and lead with 3 values, one of which is very close to, and I'm wondering whether it might evolve into love, but it is kindness. So I have kindness, courage, and generosity. And I know that when I show up for my family, friends, colleagues, the people with whom I have the privilege of working, for you today, I'm showing up with kindness, generosity, and courage too. Not knowing, the courage to not know, to be having this conversation for the first time, to be looking forward to it very much, and to your sharing. Is there anything else as we draw our conversation to a close that you would like listeners to think about?
I think if I were to attempt to bring this together into a simple, to share something I've learned. And what I've learned is that if I pause, if I remind myself to look at the whole picture, and not just the limited bit that, I want to get sorted, but the whole picture, and ask myself with love, what's really needed right now? I find that my next step is usually the right one. So I just wanted to share that in case it's of any help.
It's a question that asks of us to pause. What's needed right now? What do I need to bring right now? I think it's a brilliant question, and taking time to pause, I think, is so important in the journey of evolving leadership, really, and in becoming a skillful leadership.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Sally-Anne. Following on from our conversation today and all that you have covered, who's the person and what's the conversation you're going to go on and have?
Immediately, it would be a conversation with my partner, Simon, because he'll be curious and I'll want to share with him what happened. That's the immediate. Tonight, we're going to see the work of an old friend who's a storyteller. And we're currently in Cardiff, actually, and he's coming to Cardiff University to tell a story of ancient folklore and bring it to life. I know it'll be an allegory. I know it will be a metaphor for living today. And so when we go and see Marcus Pibworth doing his beautiful work this evening, I'm excited to see, having had this conversation with you, Annie, how that opens my mind to being super receptive to his work and what I know, the joy that he will bring in what he's doing. So I'm curious to see how this conversation today will influence my way of showing up for him this evening.
How wonderful to be going to listen to a storyteller.
I can't wait.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing some of your story, Sally-Anne. To close with, what are your 3 key encouragements to leaders and listeners of our conversation today?
Pause, look at the whole picture, ask yourself what's really needed. And somebody asked me, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self? And I realized, it took me a little moment to think about it, but I realized the advice I would give to that young woman is be more present. Because of all the things, learning to be present has been transformational in my life. Because of all the things that it enables.
That's a lovely note to close our conversation on, to be more present. And we've shared you a number of things that will help people be more present, to be in touch with what matters to them, and to think about that in the context of how they're going to show up and be more present in their life and leadership with love. Thank you for bringing your love to our conversation today, Sally-Anne. How best for people to get in touch with you, get a hold of your book, and or listen to your podcast, Fearless Forward?
My website, probably. It's all there, skillfulleaders.com. I notice that I do appear quite a bit if you Google me by name as well. The podcast is on all the usual platforms.
And the full title of your book is?
Mindful Command, The Way of the Evolving Leader.
Thank you, Sally-Anne. And can people listen to the audio book, Sally-Anne?
Yeah, so I was encouraged to record it myself, which I did. And I am told for many people that they enjoy that vehicle particularly. So yes, it's both in written and audio form in all the usual places.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sally-Anne. To listen to other leaders in conversation and to find out more about Walking Partnerships, do go to my website, annitownend.com. To listen to Finding Your Collaborative Edge with Lucy Kidd, our podcast, do go to our website, collaborationequation.com. A huge thank you to Schmogus Media for the wonderful production and marketing of the podcast, along with Louisa Penny from Penny Writing. To contact me, Anni Townend, do email me on annie@annitownend.com. Visit my website, subscribe to my newsletter, and follow me on LinkedIn. I look forward very much to connecting with you. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Sally-Anne.
You're very welcome, Annie. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.